All right, welcome to Tougies Take, episode 41. The second episode. Now that the cup has been awarded, it is over, and you would think there would be a shortage of news, but we are far from that. Tougie, how are you doing?
Doing all right. Now, I'm not worried about a lack of talking points. I honestly thought this week would be the worst, at least until everything's over and done with. I'm like, all right, there's going to be a lull where we have to sit here and try to turn Tampa denting the cup into this big story. And thankfully, no. Thankfully, there are other things to talk about. But I was worried. I was worried for a bit there.
Yeah. I mean, and it was definitely Ryan McDonough that dropped the cup because he has a broken hand. That's the only reason you would say that on the same day. Definitely that's who did it. And it wasn't Kucherov. So, yeah, I don't know. So what do you say before we get into this 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours of talking that we're going to have to do about all this news that is now occurring? Let's start with some warm-ups. So
I'm ready, I think.
So we did Shark Week last week, and that got me thinking about vintage TV.
Interesting.
So I'm going to start out with this question. It's gonna sound a little obscure, but I promise it's all going to come together. So, can you name the last network show that was recorded to videotape? Like actual reel-to-reels instead of recorded digitally.
I have a feeling it's more recent than you'd think. 2.5 Men.
No, 2.5 Men was all digital, believe it or not. So the answer, and I think the show ended in 1999. I think you'll see where this is going. The answer was Home Improvement.
Really? They made the switch to digital that quick?
Yeah, so 1999.
Like as an industry standard.
Well, it was also, I think, just network shows. So they were good to go because with network, you don't need to, it wasn't like the technology needed to catch up to be able to put something in like 8K Sony Red on like a cinema or whatever, since it was just going to TV, which was 480p at the time. 720p was the HD channels that we got in the mid 2000s.
Yeah.
So,
in fairness, I was sitting here thinking about who are old men that direct shows. So if it wasn't that, I was gonna go with Saturday Night Live for like Lorne Michaels, or like Curb Your Enthusiasm was also gonna be a guess. So I mean, you can at least see my logic of thinking that some old man would be like, no, we can't change it, it's worked this way for 50 years. But
yeah, right. Well, so Home Improvement was the last network production show to be recorded to videotape. Home Improvement was actually the first network series to be this. Care to take a guess?
To be this. You set me up. This is too wide
broad
open
of a question.
This is too wide open of a setup to even come up with anything funny.
Well, we'll get there. So anyway, it was the first network series to be syndicated, which means that it was the first ever network series bought by another network to run while it was still running. So I think you see where these warmies are going. So Tool Time. This was a special request 3 weeks ago.
Was it? Okay.
For Home Improvement themed warmies. Here we are.
Oh God, it all makes sense.
So this is one of my favorite of all the questions there are to ask. I think this one's my favorite. And this was the point where I was able to commit to this as warmies. So Tool Time and the show both originally had the same title. So the show is Home Improvement. Tool Time is the show within a show. They both originally had the same title, but this title was changed right before release to avoid conflict with MC Hammer's record label. Do you care to take a guess at what the original title of Home Improvement was?
MC Hammer had a record label?
Well, the record label he was signed with.
Oh.
The people that did his legal stuff.
God. I have no idea, but I can just tell by. I feel sorry for people who aren't watching the video form of this podcast because your face is priceless right now.
Well, the show was originally called Hammer Time. And the show within a show was also originally called Hammer Time with Tim the Toolman Taylor.
That was the name of the label?
That was they didn't want to come to conflict with his record label by naming it Hammer Time, where they'd be like, hey, you can't do that. Hammer Time's us. We're the Hammer Time people. That's really all we got going for us.
It was so obvious. I overthought it, which is the theme of these Warmies for as long as the segment's been around. It's just me overthinking everything, except for that one where I got like everyone right. But that was clearly a mirage, a figment
of
my imagination.
So Hammer Time was the original title, which is still that's delightful. So film star Ashley Judd was originally cast as Lisa the Tool Girl, but she pulled out for a film career. She went on to star in such films as Heat and Double Jeopardy. Who replaced Ashley Judd as Lisa the Tool Girl?
Pamela Anderson.
That is correct. And fun fact, in 1996, Ashley Judd went on to play a character named Pam Anderson in the movie A Normal Life. Fun coincidence.
Who in 98, though, is naming someone Pam Anderson? That's like, yeah, I'm going to go on to star as a guy named Jake Paul in a movie. It's like...
Well, this would have been in 96, so I think it was like 1 year before, like it was the last year of the window.
Gotcha. Before that name was just synonymous forever with one person.
Yeah, right?
Fair.
So Richard Karn in the show, he plays Al Borland, Tim the Toolman Taylor's trusty sidekick. Al Borland, instead of Al, what was the character's original first name?
Jim.
Close. It was Glenn, which I feel like it suits him a lot more than Al, doesn't it? Doesn't he look like a Glenn?
Well, considering he's a Richard, doesn't he look more like a... I mean, I don't know. No, that wasn't a dick joke, by the way. It's just like, but his name's Richard, and it's Al, but it's Glenn, and it's...
He's all three. He's the triumvirate of guy names.
Hold on.
Every name you can have and wear flannel, he has at the same time.
God, was he the original singer of Vertical Horizon? He's everything you want. Al is everything you need.
Oh my God. All right. So, Tougie, I warned you in the pre-show that I was going to ask a question where there is absolutely no chance in hell you know the answer to this. If you do, I'll just quit and I'll never do one of these again because it means I know nothing.
Okay.
But I just needed to state this question for fun facts, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Okay.
So one memorable Tool Time segment had two Detroit auto workers, Eddie Phillips and Hick Peterson. So Tim the Toolman Taylor, he follows them around, and they introduce us to Big Mike's Tavern, which has a signature sandwich called the Stinky. Now, I remember this episode very vividly from my childhood. Can you tell us what were the ingredients of a stinky sandwich?
No, I can't.
Good. So Hick Peterson states that to make a stinky sandwich, you need Limburger cheese, sauerkraut, a big slice of Bermuda onion, and some hot mustard. Just a Limburger cheese sandwich sucked down by a Detroit auto worker after a long day in the car mines. God. So Big Mike's Tavern is a recurring bar in the show, and apparently the real life version of Big Mike's is in Wisconsin, where they still sell the Stinky. It's like a real thing there, which is gross. People buy it out of nostalgia. They probably regret it.
That's Wisconsin. Traditions, man.
So,
God. This might be my favorite Warmy segment ever, just for the pure absurdity of it.
The people wanted it.
They did.
So Stephen Tobolowsky, an actor who you may know as Ned Ryerson from Groundhog Day. Have you not seen Groundhog Day?
Not in a long time.
It's me, Ned Ryerson. I used to date your sister until you told me not to.
Okay.
It's like the insurance guy that follows him around. He was also Action Jack Barker in Silicon Valley. or he was Stu Biggs in Californication. But Stephen Tobolowsky was originally cast in Home Improvement as what role?
One of Tim's sons.
It's like, and this is my oldest son, Brad.
He's older than me.
So actually, oh yeah, here, yeah, take
God, I'm gonna guess. It's gotta. He had to have been the neighbor.
Oh, Wilson?
Yeah, it had to have been Wilson. Wilson.
He was actually originally cast as Al Borland.
Huh.
And fun fact, Richard Karn, when he was cast as Al Borland, he kept his job as an apartment manager because they told him Tobolowsky was going to come back eventually and was only taking a break for his movie career. And Richard Karn did not quit his job as an apartment manager until mid-filming when Tobolowsky dropped out for good. So, you know, Richard Karn actually pretty handy.
Boo.
Go figure. All right, so here's another fun fact that'll blow your mind.
Imagine you live in that apartment complex and then all of a sudden you just have Al Borland showing up to be like, yeah, why is your sink clogged? Let's figure this out.
He's just always tired because he's filming.
And then you see him a few years later, and it's like, that's the guy on Family Feud. He fixed my sink. Like,
he ended our Family Feud. Now the second shower works. We're not all waiting for the same bathroom. Thanks, Al.
Oh, God.
So speaking of his oldest son, Jonathan Taylor Thomas, JTT, who originally played the middle son, Randy, is actually this much older than Zachary Ty Bryan, who played the oldest son, Brad.
Is he?
That's right. JTT is older than ZTB.
I don't know. Let's go like 2 years older.
He's a month and 1 day older, which blows everybody's mind.
Yeah. That's weird, man. That's just weird.
And so for our final question, Tim Allen.
I'm really disappointed by the lack of Jonathan Taylor Thomas, Zachary Ty Bryan trivia.
What, the JTT ZTB?
Yeah.
I mean, they formed that band. Their debut album.
All right. Yep.
No vowels required. So anyway, Tim stopped doing this.
It was #1 in Poland.
Controversial.
Oh, fuck.
That's phenomenal.
Oh, God, this is the dumbest. I love it. Welcome to the off season, everybody.
Welcome to the off season. So Tim Allen stopped doing this as often in the later seasons of the show because it was causing him physical strain.
Coke.
That is incorrect.
It's not. He
continued.
That's why he went on to the Santa Claus. You'd never know what was on set.
Because of the beard.
He stopped doing his own stunts.
You were very close. He actually stopped doing his own grunts. So the Tim Allen signature grunts, they were starting to cause him physical strain, and he was messing up his voice and his throat. So he was forced to stop doing them, just like we're being forced to stop doing these warmies.
Oh, fucking hell. I hope it was everything you ever wanted it to be. For those who wanted the home improvement tips, there you go.
We had everything. We had Ned Ryerson. We had JTT ZTB. We had Pam Anderson, Ashley Judd. Videotape, Limburger cheese sandwiches. Really is everything you could ask for.
Oh, my God.
Unless you're the type of person to ask for less.
It's
and
true.
if you are, I recommend using code Tougie. That's right, TOUGIE. For 20% off of Manscaped. Shave a little off yourself. You know, you're going to be working with tools. You are going to be improving your home. You know, fix up the shrubbery. Do a little landscaping. Do a little manscaping with Manscaped. Use code Tougie for 20% off. Your balls will thank you.
Especially
one
if
more
you're
fun fact.
Go ahead.
So before we go to the intro, did you know that in the entire history of home improvement, they never once had an establishing shot of the house and nobody knew what the house looked like?
It's expensive.
Well, doesn't that feel weird because it's home improvement?
And they never show the home.
There is no home. It's a set. It's all a lie. This is the intro now.
No, it isn't the intro now, because you need to remember that when you use code Tougie at manscaped.com. If you're in Wisconsin, you can use code Manscaped. Why? Because when you refer to the stinky, you want to make sure that it's the sandwich and not yourself. This is the intro now.
Phenomenal.
God.
There we go. Way to tie a bow on it.
It was pretty forced at the end there, but hey, we got there.
That's the whole point. If the ads aren't forced, then they come off as like disingenuous in a weird way.
Oh, God, we're leaving this entire conversation in. Hello, everybody. You're back from the intro. This is the intro now.
You're back from the intro. You've heard some songs. You've heard us talk about home improvement, and I'm sure you have questions.
Oh boy, do they have questions. And Friday's show will be that much better. We will start things off with the artist formerly known as Z-Pops once again, who has the strangest name in the world. Now, PDF. Will the Lightning ever win a Stanley Cup that people don't put an asterisk on? Also for Deej, why is it so damn hot? He says as a fellow Floridian. So Deej, it is interesting, right? 2004, asterisk, it was in Game 6. Last year, it was in the bubble. And then this year, 18 million over the cap. Here's my response as a fan of the New England Patriots. Fuck the asterisks. Just be happy you won.
Yeah.
What are they going to do? What are they going to do? This isn't college football. You're not going to get Reggie Bushed. You're fine.
Yeah, he's not going to get his Heisman back, even though you can now. I don't know. I'm just going to say it's not an asterisk. It's probably tiny little hammer marks from it getting undented. So you ask why it's so hot. So basically, there's a lot of oil in the ground from years of fossils and stuff dying. And we have brought that to the surface and burned it. Which happens is it releases the covalent bonds, which causes energy to be distributed amongst the atmosphere in the form of heat. And that, for the most part, is the thesis behind how the second law of thermodynamics is affecting global warming. And so, of course, it's going to get the hottest, the closest to the equator, because we're the closest to the sun.
Next question comes from...
did you want a joke answer? I was like... because I'm here. Planet's dying, ride a bike. What's the next question?
This comes from Richard Head 93. If you had enough money to buy any sports franchise, would you buy one? If so, which team? And what kind of moves would you make? So, Deej, if you had enough money, would you want to be one of those big dick billionaires? Although if we're talking the NHL, it's medium dick millionaires, because, you know, if you buy an NHL team... if you buy an NHL team, I mean, again, you only have so much. Would you buy a professional sports franchise, or would you spend that money going to the edge of space and acting like you actually went into space?
Ooh. I would definitely buy a professional sports franchise, because I feel like once you're in space, it's like, oh, we're here. We did it. When if I had that kind of money, I could really get in on the ground floor of the Major League Tug of War Association. I would buy the Palm Beach Pulleys. And, you know, we'd start. We'd start stiffening our hands. We'd get in early, and it's going to be the next big sport. So it would pay dividends, and then I would use that money to, I don't know, buy some crater front property on the moon, because MLT is going to be huge.
Oh my God. So I'll throw this out to everybody there. I want your best suggestions for what your favorite tug of war, your favorite major league tuggers, what that team name would be. And I have had moments like that with my friends where it's like, hey, we think of a sports league with a dumb gimmick, and what's the dumbest name you can come up with? I want to know everybody's. So let us know on Twitter. Of course, if you're on the YouTube side of things, Deej and I, our tags are on screen at all time. Tougie24, Deej 1088. I want to know. And whoever comes up with our favorite, we'll read them off on the next show. Whoever comes up with our favorite will get a prize, much like the winner of the bracket challenge got, which was absolutely nothing. But hey, you'll get our adulation on the podcast. As for the Richard Head's question, I would buy the Dallas Cowboys because money, and then I'd buy the new Dallas Cowboys on Mars. I'd have enough money to do that, and then I would. I don't know what I'd do. I don't know what I'd do. You thought I'd say I'd buy the Bruins? No. I'd buy a team everyone hates, but everyone claims. I don't know where I'm going with this. We're moving on. Deej, this one. I can't top your answer. I mean, your answer was perfect. That's what it's coming down to. You got me on that one, Chief. You got me on that one.
This one comes lassos.
This one comes from a Kamoka 1144-2, or is it 11442? 11442.
11,442, I think so.
121,000. Assuming you've heard of Ida Waguchi, I have. Is he legit or an internet sensation? An internet sensation. And basically, do you think he'll ever make it? No. Follow up when it comes to international play. Do you think opportunities for players in low market countries are too few? And yeah, so to explain Ida Waguchi, a bit of an internet sensation, and it's like, oh, here's this young Japanese kid who has really sick, stick handling. The problem with that is I equate it to the Ohtani factor. Whereas you look at last night's home run derby. When's the last time anybody gave a shit about the home run derby? But you get this player, not that Japan is unknown for baseball, but just this anomaly of here's a starting pitcher who's also leading the majors in home runs, and it's ridiculous, and it's arguably the greatest feat we've ever seen in the history of baseball to the midway point of a season. The idea of, in any sport, like if there was a Swedish baseball player who could slug like Pete Alonso, he'd be the biggest thing in baseball. If there was a basketball player from Botswana, you're going to be like, God damn, where was all this hidden talent in Botswana? If there's an incredible hockey player from Japan, you're going to be like, hey, this is cool as hell. If there's an incredible hockey player from Japan. So it's just the idea of what is essentially an anomaly. And yeah, the idea of, are there not enough chances for players out of these countries? I mean, yeah, but that's a part of, that's why there are trailblazers, so to speak. Like Ida Waguchi, is he going to be this incredible NHL player? Probably not. But depending on what he does in his career, he could go down as a real trailblazer to help lay the foundation for the future of hockey in Japan. No different than, say, someone like, Tony Hand's not the biggest name in sports, but if you're a British hockey fan, you probably know who Tony Hand is. So it's just that idea of, again, people really like the concept of a player from a market not known for that particular sport to end up finding a ton of success. So for Ida Waguchi, But hey, like I said, you can still have success in the sport of hockey. You know, success isn't limited to just the NHL. Ask Sergei Mazakin, who just retired. You know, KHL's best player ever, who never came over to the States, and you know, he didn't have to.
Yeah. I think when you look at guys that are YouTube sensations with sick hands, like you look at Zach Bell from Always Hockey or Pavel Barber, you know, those guys didn't make the NHL. They didn't even make juniors, you know? And so when you look at Ito Iguchi, who was very good, he was drafted in the 7th round by the USHL at 16 years old. Going into his draft year this year, Ito Iguchi's 17 now. Like if you just saw that YouTube video where he's like 9, yeah, he's 17 now. He is unfortunately very undersized for North American hockey at 5'3", 117 pounds. And so I think a combination of that combined with he never moved over to the US to play at a higher level, because you have to continually play against people that are better and bigger than you. And it's just, you know, he just never played against the competition you would need to. So I don't think Ito Iguchi would make the NHL. But that said, do I think it's possible that he's like a spokesperson for the game in Japan, or becomes somebody of the caliber of Pavel Barber or Zach Bell, where he's capable of growing the game without having to do it like in the NHL? Absolutely, for sure. But yeah, I don't think he's an NHL player. Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's interesting, of course, that you mentioned Zach Bell, because I mean, he's everywhere. Like there have been a couple of times where it's like, oh, you know, you load up Twitter or Reddit and it's people who aren't traditional hockey fans talking about these, you know, about these clips. So yeah, that's definitely obviously a thing. You don't have to be directly involved with the biggest sports league of that particular sport to be making a huge difference on the growth of it. So yeah, hey, I was very much rooting for Ito Iguchi to make it, but it is what it is. This one comes from @Diet Coco, friend of the show. 2 back-to-back Stanley Cup champions since 2016-17. In the same time frame, baseball, basketball, and I think he meant the NFL instead of the NHL, has had 1 back-to-back champ combined. What do you attribute this to? The inability for other teams to rebuild well, an ease of keeping a core championship team together, amazing coaching, parity. Deej, your thoughts? Why in hockey have we seen Pittsburgh and Tampa go back-to-back, but it's been such a rarity in other sports in the same time frame? Is it just a matter of that's how things lined up? Because that's my initial thought. You know, you look in terms of, you know, if it is the NFL, you know, you look in terms of like especially the Patriots, for example, you know, the at least opportunity for a lot of teams to potentially go back to back. You know, the NBA, we saw it with the Lakers a little bit over 10 years ago now. I don't know. Your thoughts on this? I thought it was an interesting question.
So, well, first and foremost, I think we can rule out one of the reasons with the NFL is because it's a 1-game playoff. You know, you can have a bad game and you're out. And I think that's why it's probably the most difficult in the NFL. And then for the MLB, because there is no salary cap, if your players take you to the World Series, they ask for insane raises. And almost any time an MLB team wins the championship, they immediately get parted out because everybody whose contract is up needs a huge raise. And because MLB owners are paying straight out of their own pockets and there's no ceiling on how much they can pay, the teams get dismantled. And then for the NBA, I would say because your team really only needs 7 guys that can regularly play and put up. Like you need 3 stars, you need 4 guys that are very good, and then you need your subs that are also capable of playing with your very good guys, but not necessarily to carry a starter role. NBA teams shuffle their personnel like no other sport. You know, it's the type of team where you lose one guy, your whole team has to rebuild because every single player has such a high impact. And I think it's just borderline impossible to keep a team together for that time frame. Although when you look at, you know, there were those years where it was Dallas and Miami. Every single year they were in the finals, and that's because they kept their teams together and just since 16-17, you really haven't seen that in the NBA, where teams just get kept together.
Yeah, I mean, even the Warriors, right? It's like they had the best example of it, but it's like, hey, let's bring in Kevin Durant. Okay, Kevin Durant's gone. So, even to that level where there was continued success, but obviously,
without
that was
a doubt.
right.
I forgot about the Warriors. They were close.
In terms of the dates he threw out, like 16-17, that was like right at the tail end, if I'm not mistaken, of the Warriors being in the final every goddamn year, which was incredible. So, yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different factors to it, right? I think the factors that he pointed out, like, is like coaching a factor? I mean, yeah, I think we've seen that as well. Like, you put a subpar coach with a great team, there are factors there where it's like, okay, well, who's really even coaching the team? So, and then if you lose, guess who's getting thrown under the bus? So, we'll move on here. Penultimate question, actually, is from Satchwell6. Does Brent Burns get traded this offseason from San Jose? And if I'm not mistaken, Deej, this really comes from an article listed that the Sharks are, quote, open for business when it comes to trade talks with teams. So look out for FinFest 2021. All the callbacks in this podcast today. So, yeah, the idea of Brent Burns and what particularly happens here with the San Jose Sharks. I think the problem for the Sharks, does Brent Burns have a ton of positive value at this point? He is 36 with 8. He's 36, 4 years left on his deal at $8 million a pop. How much value is there for that when the Sharks would have to retain salary for any possible conversation to be had here?
To me, and I know Burns isn't the same caliber of player as Jaromir Jagr, but to me, these final 4 years of the Burns contract are very similar to when Jagr went to Florida, where you are getting a player with the household brand name recognition that is very popular with fans. The Panthers ended up getting a 20-goal scorer out of Jagr. Like, he was not the dominant player he once was, but he was still very good. And that said, he wasn't getting paid a ton either. But I think Brent Burns' value is in that name recognition, him being an extremely popular player, even if he can't play up to his salary anymore. And so that's why I think there is a market to get traded, especially, and I mean, we'll talk about this a little bit later, in a world where Duncan Keith doesn't get any salary retained. I think for sure there's a market.
Obviously, we'll talk about that, but that's the question of, can you find another GM who's that blinded by the record books?
Yeah.
I mean, again, Brent Burns as a player is still very useful. It's just that contract is scary. Right, it is. And it's the same thing for the majority of the Sharks players. Like, is that Erik Karlsson contract tradable? Probably not. Marc-Edouard Vlasic, $7 million per for the next 5 years at 34 years old. Is that movable? I don't know, man. I mean, that's the big issue with the Sharks, right? We talked about it as the season played out, and as we continue to move on, you look at this team, Martin Jones, $5.75 for 3 more years. Logan Couture, $8 million a season for 6 years. Evander Kane, $7 million a season for 4 years. Timo Meier, $6 million a year for 2 years. Kevin LeBanc signed a new deal. His name's out there for $4.725 for 3 more years. I mean, yeah, these are contracts you want to get rid of. I'm sure they're open for business. What are they going to say? Like, no, we're perfectly happy with our absolutely atrocious set of circumstances. You obviously don't expect that to be the answer. So,
yeah.
And our final question then, and I'm sure obviously we'll talk more about the Sharks later on. I mean, again, next week is our big dip into the expansion draft, the drafts, all the fun stuff. This comes from a Habs_fan. Any no movement clauses other than, I presume he means Eric Johnson or Milan Lucic, that you see being waived for Seattle? Now, Deej, I went through the list of the top 50 most expensive deals in the NHL with a no movement clause, and I want your opinion on my thoughts on who could be traded based off of names we've heard thrown out there. Sergei Bobrovsky, do you see any way Florida would pay the price to be able to move him to Seattle, but also Sergei Bobrovsky potentially waiving that deal?
I mean, the potential's definitely there, but I'd imagine it's expensive, especially in a world where there are a few very good goalies. Like, there's rumors of Fleury ending up in Seattle. I think it depends how dry this goalie market ends up being for Seattle. But it's a long shot.
I think as well for Florida, while it would be nice, you at least don't have to worry about paying Spencer Knight yet. So, you can kind of afford, you can almost view it as we're paying Bobrovsky $5 million, we're paying Spencer Knight $5 million, everything's okay.
Exactly.
And it looks a little bit better in that regard. Another name, because it keeps getting thrown out there all the time, do we see the Pittsburgh Penguins finally move on from Evgeny Malkin?
I don't think so.
I don't either.
There's only two teams I could see Malkin going to, and I can't really see him going to Florida, but it's always rumored for some reason. I could see him going to Washington to play with Ovi, just to recreate, the World Championship / Olympic team.
That would be so fun.
But I don't see that happening. I don't see Pittsburgh dealing him within the division. And then I also don't see what they'd be able to get back from Seattle. And the whole thing, I don't think Malkin goes anywhere.
Steven Stamkos.
I can see him being dealt this offseason for sure, but I don't think it's necessarily in the expansion draft.
Fair. Oliver Ekman-Larsson.
I think this is a similar situation. I think why would you want him to waive his no movement clause for that expansion draft when just anybody, your team is so average, anybody they take is going to be a huge blow. So there's no real benefit to it other than that he requested a trade and they're trying to work something out. It's a weird situation.
It's abysmal.
Yeah, it would feel forced.
Well, along the lines there, Phil Kessel also in Arizona.
I'd say, of all of these listed, I would say he's one of the more likely ones. Because to me, it seems like Kessel hasn't really fit in Arizona.
Marc-Edouard Vlasic.
If Seattle's below the cap floor.
And the last one I thought that was interesting was Keith Yandle.
So to me, I think this is the most likely of these seven. Now, I don't think any of them actually happen, but I think of these seven, this is probably the most likely because Yandle, he has that Iron Man streak. He's going to want to go somewhere where he can play. He brings an intangible, he brings that intangible high skill ability to your power play. And the most important part of this that I think needs to be mentioned, because it's all anybody has been talking about on Florida Panthers Twitter and Florida Panthers subreddit, and that is Keith Yandle has sold his house and no longer owns any property in Florida.
The sleuths, they're at work. Now, there's one name that I did not mention that people are saying, what about that guy? It's obvious. And that's Jeff Skinner. Because according to John Vogel, the Sabres have not asked Jeff Skinner to waive his no-movement clause for the expansion draft. Agent Don Meehan tells The Athletic. It was also reported by David Pagnotta that the Sabres and Kraken have instead discussed a Kyle Okposo trade. So apparently, the Buffalo Sabres, in terms of freeing up cap or trying to work something out with Seattle in terms of, hey, take this guy, Jeff Skinner's apparently not involved. That deal is bad enough that they're not even going to be able to work out anything with Seattle.
Yeah, that contract's an absolute boat anchor. It would take a miracle for them to get rid of it. And yeah, I totally understand why you didn't even include Skinner, because that contract's not going anywhere unless Jeff Skinner just has a career renaissance. And then why would you get rid of him?
Mm-hmm. Unless Jack Eichel is included, as everyone has has thrown out there. Well, if Jack's included, then maybe. Would you take it? So, yeah, it was interesting. But speaking of albatross contracts, shall we talk about the Edmonton trade?
Yes. Yes, we should.
We have made people wait long enough.
Yeah. The Edmonton trade, which Ken Holland has only made worse with each passing comment.
With each passing minute.
Man, that guy is out of touch.
So again, in case you somehow have not heard, the full trade is Edmonton sending defender Caleb Jones and a 2022 conditional third-round pick that could become a second if Edmonton makes the Cup final and Duncan Keith is top 4 in time on ice amongst defenders. So likely to still be Caleb Jones and a third next year to the Chicago Blackhawks for Duncan Keith and forward Tim Soderlund. Now, Deej will start off by what this means for Edmonton. And the obvious first thing that stands out, no retention on the deal. So the Oilers take the full weight of Duncan Keith's $5.5 million contract.
Yeah. I think what happens from here is that Connor McDavid requests a trade. We were talking about this. The Oilers have so much so much cap room to bring in people this offseason where they could just say, hey, you want to take a discount to play with McDavid? And they'd be like, sure, let's go win what is sure to be the first of 2 to 3 cups throughout McDavid's career. And instead, they, sorry, Connor, it's just not your year. That's what they told him. It's like, next time, kid.
So the unfortunate side of this being, of course, that, and we'll talk about this, had they waited a day, turns out they could have started talking to Ryan Suter. But they take on, again, this full $5.5 million per, after doing such a great job on the Ryan Nugent-Hopkins extension. Everyone's like, oh man, he should have at least gotten $1.5 million to $2 million more than he got. And this is how you chose. This is how you chose to spend the money. Was this right here, the idea of I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and spend that money on Duncan Keith. And the interesting side of this, and this comes from Puckpedia, if Duncan Keith were to retire after this upcoming season, the Blackhawks would have a $5.5 million cap hit in 2022-23, so the year after, and a $2 million cap hit in 23-24 because of a recapture. So similar, of course, to what you've heard with like, oh, Shea Weber and everything that's gone on there. There would be a recapture penalty for the Chicago Blackhawks. So perhaps that was the opening that had them say, let's not do any other retention because we'd already be screwed over in terms of a recapture. And the Oilers would be fine. Like the Oilers would be fine in terms of the financial side of this. So it's very interesting that that's how it worked out.
All right. Welcome to Tougies Take, episode 41. Again, the episode where Deja's internet finally died.
We've been so lucky. We've had very few technical issues like that in the history of the show so far, but hey, it was your turn. Too many jokes, too many puns.
Yeah, I think it's because people are driving too many cars. It's getting too hot. The cables are melting. Ride a bike. But
episode 41.5, The Tool Man's Revenge.
The Tool Man's Revenge. This is what happens. We make one cocaine joke. Always haunting us.
So we were talking about the Duncan Keith trade and the lack of retention. And I was going to mention as well, if we can try to jump back in and get our mojo back, the fact that for Chicago, I do wonder if the lack of retention was influenced by this factor for them. And that is, if Duncan Keith retires after this upcoming season, the Blackhawks are back on the books for his contract. They would have a $5.5 million cap hit in 22-23. So it's as if he'd be playing, and then a $2 million cap hit the next year in 23-24 due to the recapture. And obviously we've seen recapture penalties with the likes of what will happen if Shea Weber retires a little bit earlier. We've already seen it with Roberto Luongo and how that's affected the both Florida Panthers and the Vancouver Canucks. So Edmonton would be completely off the books if he were to retire after 1 year. So maybe that explains the lack of retention. I'm not entirely sure. But the problem is, it just really does. I mean, you were alluding towards what the hell is wrong with Ken Holland. And I mean, you look at the situation, and word came out while we were recording that, like, Nicoletti is on the market. The New York Islanders are shopping him. We know that someone like Vince Dunn is on the market. Granted, how good of a fit is that? The Blues are looking for a draft pick, not a veteran like Duncan Keith. But, you know, the sense of it really does feel like they just went for the first available option who kind of fit like what they wanted. But I don't know. It's tough to sit here and look at this and say that it's a great move. You know, we're talking about the Oilers, like I said, for Chicago and the potential recapture, what effect did that have? But for the Oilers, still, you look at it at the face value of no retention whatsoever. So again, you did so well in the Nugent Hopkins deal and saving that bit of extra money by giving him term. And then this is what you do. And sure, maybe more moves to come. Maybe we see their own buyout. Maybe we see someone like James Neal go off the market. That could certainly happen. But all signs pointed to this is what Duncan Keith wanted. He signed off on the paperwork to waive his no movement clause to go to Edmonton, but the no movement clause sticks with him, so the Oilers will have to protect him in the expansion draft. The Oilers were apparently Duncan Keith's first choice, and we know now that because of border restrictions, he barely got to see his 8-year-old son, and that was the main influence behind wanting to move where he did. So, I mean, for Duncan Keith, he gets what he wants. He gets to, go to a Canadian team. Less travel restrictions depending on what happens moving forward. Gets to go to a team that should make the playoffs. So again, for Duncan Keith, this was the best case scenario. But for the Oilers, Steve, for the Oilers and the Ken Holland move, and I saw this comment of, are we allowed to say that, like, I don't think we're allowed to say, I agree with this comment that, Ken Holland's officially at fault now. You can't sit here and say, oh, well, his hands were tied by this move Chiarelli made. Like, he made this Duncan Keith move. He re-signed Zach Cassian. They're taking up $9.1 million in space. It's some of the concerns I think people had about Ken Holland in the aftermath of his final few years with the Red Wings. And now you're seeing some similar risky moves at face value at the very least. Your thoughts just on this in general and what it means for the Oilers?
So, in general, I'm trying to find some value for this. Obviously, you get the cup experience of Duncan Keith. He's not the player he used to be, but Duncan Keith is an upgrade over a lot of defensemen on this team, which is not saying a lot for the D-core on the Oilers. But when I look, there's part of this trade I want to talk about because I think it kind of goes unsaid. And that is, why would Edmonton want Tim Soderlund? And I thought about this, and it's actually, there's a lot more to this than you would think of him just being an AHL player that gets like moved around, because obviously he has struggled with Chicago's AHL team, with the Ice Hogs rather, and he has not, he hasn't cracked an NHL roster. What does Tim Soderlund have going for him? He is a hard worker. He is a great locker room guy. And 3, and this is the most important thing, and this is what I want to bring up, he is one of the fastest skaters in all of professional hockey. Now, why would you want a guy like that? Is it because the best player on your team is the fastest skater in all of professional hockey, and maybe you need somebody that can just kind of stand there and get into position at the same time as him? I think there's a shot we see Soderlund play with McDavid, which is crazy to think of, this AHL guy that got 6 assists last year, but you know.
It's funny though, because my initial instinct was like, oh great, you're still stuck on that where you can't get McDavid reasonable line mates. But the thought is that's almost the Crosby effect.
Yeah,
right? The idea
exactly.
that Crosby can play with essentially whoever, and then that way you can spend the extra money to bolster up the middle six, or the defense pairings. So I mean, maybe, who's to say, right? Like obviously that's I don't want to say a shot in the dark, it's a possibility. Obviously, I don't think it'll instill Oilers fans in confidence when you're talking about, we can weaponize our cap space and really boost the team. And then the idea of Tim Soderlund is on your top line with Connor McDavid. You're like, really?
Yeah.
But, I mean, again, I don't discredit what Duncan Keith can bring as someone like we saw as a Zdeno Chara this year. Third pair role for Washington. He was an effective player. Duncan Keith, third pair role with a lot of veteran experience. Yeah, but for $5.5 million compared to Zdeno Chara's dirt cheap contract, that's obviously the sticking point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, $5.5 million is a lot to pay for a defenseman that is not a surefire top 3 guy. And I don't know, maybe a change of scenery, maybe the lack of emotional distress from, not being able to see his son. Like maybe that improves his game. So I don't know. We'll see. Like, I certainly hope Duncan Keith plays to a level, but if he doesn't, I think you got to get rid of Ken Holland. I think he's made his bed and he has sabotaged what should be reminiscent of the 80s Oilers dynasty.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, right? Because you think about now Ken Holland and how long he's been there. I mean, it has been 2 years already. 2 months, or 2 years, 2 months, 6 days as of today's recording that he's been with the Edmonton Oilers. I mean, there are certainly fans that are, it's like, okay, you've made these interesting moves. Let's see how the rest of the offseason goes. And obviously there are Oilers fans that want results and want them fast because, again, you do have the, at the very least, the most dynamic player in hockey. I would say use Connor McDavid and best in the same sentence. Some people still wouldn't, whatever, because of an all-around game. But yeah, for the Oilers, it is for Ken Holland. Put up or shut up at this point. I mean, this was your trade. This was your guy. $5.5 million. Again, now depending on what happens with the rest of the offseason, that's less money that you have to work with moving forward. Their projected cap space is listed at $11.5 million now. In terms of UFAs, you have Alex Chiasson, Tyler Ennis, Patrick Russell, Slater Cuckoo, Tyson Barrie, Dmitry Kulikov, and Adam Larson. RFA is Jujhar Khaira, Kyler Yamamoto, Dominic Cahoon. I mean, and Mike Smith is also a UFA. So depending on what happens there, there are players that in theory you're going to want to bring back already. Like the word is out that Oscar Klefbom is potentially going to miss this upcoming season as well. So, there's a bit of LTIR money there, but it's not as promising of a picture, if that makes sense, as it was 2 days ago in terms of the cap space, the moves they had to make, and what they were looking to do. Because that extra $2.5 million could go a long way.
Yeah, I agree. So we'll see how the rest of this offseason plays out for Edmonton. It certainly is not an exciting time to be an Oilers fan, which is crazy to think about considering the 2 best players in hockey are on your team.
It's exciting, but it's not as carefree as it should be.
Yeah, right.
If that makes sense. Like there's still just so much nervous, and it's like Toronto. This should be a very exciting time. For the Edmonton Oilers, you have the best player in hockey on your team. For the Toronto Maple Leafs, you have this incredible core group of guys. But still, it's not right. So it's just not going the way that it should go, that you want it to go, that you essentially need it to go. So there's still all this nervous energy and anxiety over what shouldn't be this stressful of a situation.
Absolutely.
Now, unless you have something else to add, we'll move on to the Chicago side of this trade.
No, yeah, I think that's the logical point, and I think it's kind of obvious what Chicago's trying to do here.
So, from this perspective, you moved on from one of your best players in franchise history in Duncan Keith. Obviously, there's the emotions from that, and rightfully so. You know, not easy. And you look now at the core group of guys that aren't there anymore. Seabrook's gone, Keith is gone, Corey Crawford's gone, Patrick Sharp, Marian Hossa, Brian Bickle, like all of these guys are gone. You know, the only holdovers are Patrick Kane and Jonathan Taves. Like that's it. And those are the guys that you knew would be around the longest. Like that was obvious when they signed those deals. That was the expectation. So obviously there's the emotions of that. And yes, Duncan Keith, like retired number. Yes. Like Duncan Keith will have his number retired. He is a Chicago Blackhawks legend. We're not going to sit here and talk about Hockey Hall of Fame potential yet. He'll make it, but that's a conversation for a different time. His career's not done. For Chicago, you get Caleb Jones, who, you know, for the Oilers, it was very clear that they just felt he wasn't going to be what they thought he would be or what he could be. I mean, I didn't think, I don't know. You know, if the internal feeling was he's just not what we need him to be, then so be it. I feel a bit puzzled by that. I mean, I guess at 24, you'd start to have that opinion, but okay, they decide, look, he's not going to be what we need him to be. He's expendable. We can get him a change of scenery. So for Chicago, obviously where they are right now, you know, you do have that ability to maybe try to rehab him, right? And I mean, from an analytical perspective as well, I'll say with Caleb Jones, you know, Oilers fans shouldn't be like, oh my God, we lost this guy, but he is 24. You never know. So for Chicago, you get a guy that you might be able to kind of mold into the image that you want and help him get back on the proper track. You know, I don't think for Edmonton it's a disaster that you traded Caleb Jones. For Chicago, it's not the biggest return in the world that you got Caleb Jones, but obviously he still has potential where we know what Duncan Keith is at this stage. The other big factor, I mean, and just talking about the pieces here, they do get an extra draft pick, which is great. The idea of them giving up Tim Soderlund, like Deej mentioned, might work out for Edmonton, but, you know, for Chicago, it was looking a bit rocky, right? I think Caleb Jones, Tim Soderlund, like those are the pieces to be comparing, just because, again, it's two young guys, 23 and 24, that look like they needed a change of scenery to try and get something going. At least that's how I view the trade. But for Edmonton in general, or excuse me, for Chicago in general now, you have the draft pick aspect, which is great. So you have the young player aspect who might be able to turn it around. That's good. You know, you look at their defense right now as it stands, and it's not pretty, but it's a young defense. On their cap friendly right now, you have Calvin DeHaan at 30 years old. He's got 1 year left. Connor Murphy at 28. He's got 1 year left. Nikita Zadorov's an RFA at 26. And then this is their listed defense. Former Florida Panther Riley Stillman, who is 23. Ian Mitchell's 22. Wyatt Kalaniuk, if I'm pronouncing that wrong, I'm sorry, but he's 24. Adam Boqvist at 20 and Caleb Jones at 24. So they get another younger defenseman into the mix. They still have other defensive prospects on the up and up. Nick Badan, Chad Chris. So there are options there. That's not bad. The draft pick situation for Chicago, you have your first, you have 2 seconds, you don't have your third, but you have 2 fourths, so not bad. Next year, they already have 3 third-round picks. So you get a young player who might be able to turn it around. You have draft picks. You have $10 million, almost $11 million in cap space, with really no major players to re-sign. No disrespect to Nikita Zadorov or Alex Nylander, but no major players to re-sign. And now the natural thought that people are connecting is, well, you just traded for Seth Jones' brother. And does this open up that maneuverability to go and potentially work out a deal to acquire Seth Jones from the Columbus Blue Jackets? Again, a lot of people talk about it as if, and Deej mentioned this before too, as if he's a free agent. He's not. He's got 1 year deal or 1 year left in his deal. So all of a sudden, Deej, right? The optics around Chicago have changed. You have the draft picks. You have some cap space. Seth Jones, those rumors are there. Out of nowhere from Scott Powers, Blackhawks could be in play for Marc-Andre Fleury. I mean,
it doesn't feel right.
It doesn't at all.
Wrong about it.
It doesn't feel right at all, but there's some maneuverability here for the Blackhawks. And how do you view this? How do you view them at this stage?
Well, you know, Tougie, I said it when we were like, here's the postmortem for the Blackhawks this season. We talked about the team when we were talking about if they were going to make the playoffs this year. We talked about the team. We talked about the piece that this team was missing. Obviously, Lankinen had a rough patch, but aside from that rough patch, he looks like a very good goalie. You have Jonathan Toews, you have Patrick Kane, you have Alex DeBrincat. You need an elite right shot defenseman. It is the glaring hole in their roster. There happens to be an elite right shot defenseman that has requested a trade that also has a no move clause. So you would want to incentivize that right shot defenseman to come to your team. I mean, I don't think they had any thoughts other than, hey, Caleb Jones is an NHL level defenseman. He is. He has played 76 games over the last 2 years. He can play on our team. His brother completes our team. And because of his no move clause, can handcuff Columbus into where he wants to go so that we don't necessarily have to give up a ton to get him. And I think that, it's just so obvious at this point that something would have to go horrifically wrong in the negotiations for Jarmo Kekalainen, where he's asking for way too much. And I think we're going to see a Jarmo Kekalainen that does not ask for way too much, because we saw him lose so many free agents just 2 years ago, leaving him with nothing. And I mean, that prospect cupboard is still bare. That team is still struggling to put the pieces back together. I think Seth Jones is Chicago Blackhawk before the puck drops this season.
Yep. Completely agree at this stage. And I mean, again, we talked about it. Chicago, they have the draft picks to be able to give Columbus some of what they'd want. Columbus, the prospect pool is barren, like you say, or maybe not barren, but it's getting there. And
it's
Chicago,
not good. We'll say
Chicago has young players to be able to give up in this trade. Now, again, Seth Jones is going to be a Chicago Blackhawk, like Deej said. Unless something drastic happens, that is going to occur. You can argue from there how many more pieces, obviously, this team needs. And yeah, like they're in terms of, Deej used the word complete, and I know people are going to disagree with that. I do disagree with that as well. I think their blueprint is closer to being completed, if that makes sense. I still think that you have some other holes you need to fill, because, again, I talked about how young that defense core is. If you have Seth Jones, Calvin DeHaan, Connor Murphy as your big three, like you would need a lot of that youth, like a Boqvist, to really step up and be able to carry the weight. Which, is he capable of doing so? Perhaps. But there's no denying that getting Seth Jones at least pushes Chicago that much closer to being where they want to be. And it's the Bruins effect. It's the Pittsburgh effect, the Washington effect. As long as you have those star players that you currently have, you have to go for it for as long as it is worth going for it in general. Now, obviously, hey, you moved on from certain players. You just moved on from Duncan Keith. Why? Because it wasn't, the past few seasons, it wasn't going to work, essentially. But just like that, this quick little refresh, and things are looking better. So certainly a lot more optimism maybe not often you'd see that, but a lot more optimism surrounding the team that got rid of a 3-time Stanley Cup champion as opposed to a team that picked up a 3-time Stanley Cup champion.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at the cap space that Chicago has, and they acquire Seth Jones. There is still room for them to acquire. Which one? There we go. David Savard. They could add another very good defenseman. They have the cap space, and I don't know. We'll see.
It's funny because, you mentioned that, right? Like Seth Jones' deal is up at the end of the following season, this upcoming year. But again, I mentioned DeHaan and Murphy are up at the end of the year too, and that's $8 million combined. That'd be off the books on the blue line. And then you could sit there and refresh and say, okay, who works the best with our young core? Who works the best with Seth Jones being our number one defender? Seth Jones is gonna be a Chicago Blackhawk.
Yeah, and I think, I'm going to call it right. The return's going to be something like Henrik Borgstrom in a second. Like, you see Jarmo Kekalainen, he likes his Finnish players. He's going to want a talented young Finnish center to try and lure Patrick Laine into staying this season. It just makes so much sense. So we'll see.
The only other talking point here I have for Chicago, and again, it's just because it won't go away. A lot of people, and I put out a video about this as well, in terms of some of the terminology coming out in regards to dismissals that the Blackhawks are firing, or sending out there in terms of the court proceedings. I only wanted to mention this. Deej's opinion is very steadfast, and I agree with his opinion that you have to look at the perspective in which documents like that are coming from, because the headline is essentially out there. Basically, the Hawks say that the Blackhawks player Aldridge allegedly assaulted in 2010 was not a minor, not disabled, and not in a care facility, so they didn't have to report it. People see that and say, what the fuck's wrong with you? And obviously, Deej, I know your opinion of this is, well, it's the way it is in terms of the legal context. There's a difference between the legality of the situation and the morality of the situation. So the court of public opinion is obviously going to view with the morality side of it. I very much do as well. I'm not saying that I look at that statement and say such and such. My opinion is heads should still roll within the Blackhawks organization, whether or not they had a legal obligation to report it or not. Right? I think everybody agrees with that. Something should be done. Legally, did you have to report it? No. But morally, you still gave him a letter of recommendation, because let's just call a spade, unless we're mistaken, the Aldrich family is a part of the hockey club, in that Brad Aldrich's father still works for the San Jose Sharks to this day. He's worked for the Sharks for almost as long as I've been alive. So obviously it seems to be you did the guy's kid a favor by helping him get a job elsewhere after he screwed up, and then he went on to hurt more people. So again, when you see statements like that, and I'll let Deej speak on this himself if he wants to, you have to try to avoid the outrage of how things are worded when it comes to court documents.
Yeah.
But I think most people agree that from the moral perspective of this, there needs to be something that happens to the Chicago Blackhawks.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean, that's the other thing too, is like, I certainly feel that way. Like, and that's what's also weird, is like, we don't necessarily even know. I mean, it certainly seems that way if the Blackhawks did something wrong, they might not have at this point. Like, there are certain ways events could have gone down where the Blackhawks, in the court of public opinion, wouldn't have done anything wrong. I mean, although that's seeming increasingly unlikely as the days pass. But that's the thing, though, too, is like, this was kind of like a statement cherry picked from their legal defense, where basically when you take someone to court or you have to sue for something, basically you have a list of charges where you're like, oh, this person was civilly liable under tort law for this, or they were criminally liable under legal law for this. And so basically this case will likely come down to tort law, which is like, somebody made a dick move and you need to be financially compensated for it, versus criminal law, where you broke the law and now somebody needs to be financially compensated for it. So basically what the Blackhawks are saying in this thing is, hey, we didn't have a legal duty to report this, so we didn't break criminal law. Now, that's not why they're saying they didn't report it. They're just saying we didn't break any criminal laws, which would change what they were liable for, would change how much they have to pay out. It would make things significantly messier. We will likely still see this case proceed under civil law. And it's important to know the difference, because there are two types of law in the United States. There is, hey, I can sue you because you hit me with your car, or there's, hey, you're criminally negligent because you tried to kill me with your car. Those are two very different things here. If that makes sense at all, criminal law versus civil law. Mm-hmm. It's worth knowing if you're a member of the United States, because it's infinitely complicated. But that's basically what Chicago is saying here. They're not saying that's why we didn't do anything because we didn't have to. It's basically them saying, like, if you're a school teacher and one of your kids tells you like their parents are hitting them, you are legally required to go to the state and say something like that. Basically, the Chicago was saying, because of our situation, our responsibility, our authority over this, no part of this situation triggered a legal obligation for us. That doesn't mean they still shouldn't have probably not recommended him. But, I'm hoping the dominoes fall in a way where nobody in Chicago did anything wrong, because I just hope for the best, and I hope that people aren't dicks. But we'll see, And
to bring this back to a positive tone, I would watch the show Tort Law weekdays at 2.
With John Tortorella. Welcome to Tort Law. So Texas, he's like, when I bench players, I like to refer to it as civil forfeiture.
Oh, God.
Take away your ice time, eminent domain. All right, so
we'll move on. We'll move on to one of the other big talking points today that broke this morning that we didn't know we were actually going to be able to talk about, and that is that the Minnesota Wild are planning on buying out both Zach Parise and Ryan Suter. Each had 4 years left on their deals. Easy for me to say, with both players becoming free agents as of July 28th. Now, very interesting set of circumstances here when it comes to the dead cap space and cap friendly.
I just looked at that dead cap space. Holy cow.
Oh, yeah. Now, again,
Mistake.
These two signed their deals on July 4th of 2012, 13 years each. Now, the Wild will pay each $6.7 million over the next 8 years, and will be charged in terms of cap this amount. Now, instead of naming what it is per person, I'll just name off the total, and I'm going to throw a lot of numbers at you guys here, okay? So, for these deals, here's the important thing to note. 21-22, this upcoming season, and basically you can divide this number by 2 if you want to know how much each is costing the team. In terms of dead cap, Parise and Suter will count for $4.7 million against the books this season towards the cap. So in terms of cap space, Suter, Parise, $4.7 million of dead cap stays on the books. Deej, for 2022-23, the buyouts will hit for $12.7 million combined against the cap. 12 million. They will be a Connor McDavid contract against the cap to have Parise and Suter not play for them in 2022-23.
It
gets worse.
So is Bill Guerin the worst GM in the NHL? Like, this is the same guy that gave Jared Spurgeon $53 million over 7 years.
I would do that, in fairness. He's the Mackenzie Weegar of the Wild, to put it in certain terms.
I mean, that's fair. But
in 2023-24, Parise and Suter will count for $14.7 million against the cap. So let me remind you, this season, $4.7 million for the both of them. 2022-23, 12.7. 23-24, 14.7. Oh, and it gets worse. In 2024-25, another $14.7 million against the cap. And then from there, it drops down to 1.6 repeated, so 1.6 million for 4 more years after that. This is perhaps the wildest buyout, pun fully intended, in the history of the NHL. And we have seen some crazy buyouts. We just saw the Kyle Turris buyout, but they get $4 million, almost $5 million in relief this year. And then again, 12.7, 14.7, 14.7 against the cap for those 2 players. You could pay Connor McDavid and a third liner for what Minnesota will be held to have Parise and Suter not play for their teams through 2023 to 2025. It's insanity.
So what's interesting is that they are technically saving money every year.
Technically, yes.
They like, even when it's at like the 7.3, I mean, the AAV on both these contracts was about 7.5 per year.
Mm-hmm.
So they do technically have more money to go around. Like, maybe these guys were just so injured or not playing that. I mean, I think Ryan Suter is still a very good player, and that's why I'm kind of baffled at this. This puts the team in a situation where they can spend to the cap in 2023-24 or 24-25, and they will still, if you take away this buyout clause, they will still only be $5 million above the cap floor. It's insane. It's such a huge hit. This is almost 20% of your cap space.
So, in talking about what this means then for Minnesota, and then we'll talk about the players. And this comes directly from the Athletic article by Michael Russo. Highly recommend checking out. Again, we've mentioned Michael Russo on the show. You've heard Michael Russo mentioned on other shows. He's a fantastic reporter. This gives Minnesota another $10.33 million in cap space this summer, where Kirill Kaprizov and Kevin Fiala have to be re-signed, and the team could be pursuing a number 1 center. The buyouts also open up 2 spots in the expansion draft next week. The team will now likely protect forwards Matt Zuccarello, Fiala, Eriksson Ek, Marcus Foligno, Jordan Greenway, Ryan Hartman, and Nico Sturr, along with defensemen Jared Spurgeon, Jonas Brodin, and Matt Dumba, and goaltender Cam Talbot. Assuming that's how it plays out, Victor Rask, Carson Suchi, Capo Kakinen, Brennan Manel, and others will be exposed.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I get it. So they currently have 26 million cap space.
Yes.
I guess when that goes up another 8 to 10, so we'll say they have 16 million cap space. They still need to sign Kaprizov. I understand how the numbers work, and I understand why this is good for them in the expansion draft. But geez, when this team is just hitting their window in 23-24, where this team starts to gel and they need a new goalie, they're just going to be hit with so much. This team is going to start really moving along, and then they're just going to get they're going to fall apart for 2 years.
Yeah, 23-24 and 24-25, again, almost $15 million against the cap. How affected is the depth of your team? I mean, again, like you talk about the idea of, and here, we'll look at this, right? Let's look at this. I'm going to look at this from like a Bruins perspective and a Florida Panthers perspective to really make it hit home. So for the Bruins, imagine, now Bruins fans, this is rough, but imagine Charlie Coyle is off the roster and you can't use that money to replace him. Imagine essentially Jake DeBrusk and Craig Smith are also off that roster. Matt Grzelcyk. Basically get rid of at least 5 players off of the Bruins roster right now who are under contract and say, and that's money you cannot use to go out and get replacements for them. They're just gone for those 2 years. For the Florida Panthers, you talk about almost $15 million. The Panthers right now, I mean, granted, 2 of them are closer to $6 million, but Barkov at 5'9", Huberdeau at 5'9", Horkvist at 5'3". I mean, it's just, you look at any roster and you think, okay, remove $15 million worth of cap and say, and you don't have the money to replace anybody except on like ELCs.
Yeah.
What do you do? Absolutely insane. Now, for the Wild in their tenure, I mean, Minnesota had a winning record. They were tied for 8th in the NHL in terms of total team points. During the 9 seasons the team were there, they made the playoffs 8 times. It was a successful tenure for Parise and Suter in terms of at least giving the team a shot. Obviously, you know, historically struggling to make it out of the first round. But just, I think everybody knew at the time, like, okay, these contracts are going to be trouble. And now we're here, and I think it's more trouble than I think anybody really would have thought.
Yeah, I agree. And it just, with Suter, to me, it seems like I understand the Parise buyout. Like, that makes a little bit of sense to me. But with Suter, it seems kind of short-sighted. He's not a bad defenseman. Sure, is he playing up to that 7.6 salary? No, but you are still getting a guy who, in my opinion, is worth 4.5. So isn't it better to take that hit of $3 million than of $7 million? Like,
it just screams
and then you
that they
replace him on the ice.
It just screams that they really wanted to keep Matt Dumba.
Yeah, I guess so.
Because obviously, like, Spurgeon and Brodin, you're not going to get rid of. Like, from an analytical perspective, those two are darlings to say the least. So the outlier is Dumba, and there was all the trade rumors about Matt Dumba's going to be the one to get traded. But instead, you buy out Ryan Suter so you can protect Matt Dumba. And, you know, whatever the optics are behind that decision, that's a tough decision to make just for this buyout alone. And yeah, you're not wrong. Like, Ryan Suter at 36 years old is still a serviceable defender. You know, still a good penalty killer as well. And I think if you have him in a more reduced role, like we've talked about, in a third pair veteran role or even second pair, as long as he is not having to be the guy for you, then yeah, Ryan Suter's still serviceable. It's why I made the joke about Ken Holland. It's like, oh shit, you could have had Ryan Suter instead. Yeah. And, you know, I'm sure Ryan Suter will sign somewhere for $3 or $4 million. It's not going to be $7. So I fully expect, and we can talk about it for Ryan Suter in terms of what's next. Like, a damn good shot at the cup. Again, like, he leaves Minnesota as the franchise's all-time leader in scoring and assists amongst defenders after just 9 seasons. He is still a very serviceable defender. There are going to be a lot of teams that now look at someone like Ryan Suter and say, yeah, like, I don't know if there's a single team in the NHL that shouldn't be calling and asking Ryan Suter what he wants.
Can you imagine a top defensive pairing of Seth Jones and Ryan Suter on the Chicago Blackhawks? Because they can afford it.
The Nashville duo that we never got. It could happen. Like I said, there's not a single team. I mean, Tampa, you're going to lose David Savard. Hey, here's Ryan Suter. Go on down, Ryan.
Yeah, if you want to ice 6 forwards next year, sure.
Dirt cheap contract, Ryan. Come win a cup. You know, like, you just made your money, Ryan. You can't tell us you didn't make your money. Dirt cheap deal. Let's go.
I mean, and in my opinion, he's very much like a even level replacement for Savard. Like, him and Savard, in my opinion, even though Savard's a little bit younger, at their current game, are very much interchangeable in the type of game they play. I mean, I don't expect Suter to age as well as Savard will over the next few years, but holy cow.
So then you get to talking about Ryan Parise and Zach Parise. Sorry, I was
his
looking
brother,
at
the realtor.
Yeah, Zach Suter and Ryan Parise.
I heard he listed the Ferrigno house.
Now, obviously, like, Parise had been scratched. It's not surprising. There was the rumored trade to the New York Islanders that was, from all perspectives, it looks like Lou Lamoriello put the kibosh on because the news got out that the deal was going to go through. But he's third all-time in wild goals and points at 36 years old. But yes, you look at the metrics, and it does not paint a very pretty picture for Zach Parise, but he's going to get signed. Like, someone's going to give Zach Parise a chance as well to be even a bottom six power play specialist. Like, both of these guys will be signed. I presume Zach Parise for less money than what Ryan Suter's going to get. But both of them are going to be signed.
I believe, okay, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I do know that I don't know if Parise is a francophone himself, but I do know that his father was a fluent French speaker from Ontario. Now, does he fit in that Canadiens roster? Does he become the new Joe Thornton on Toronto? I mean, there's so many Canadian teams. I mean, the Canadian teams, all of them are so young right now and are missing a player like Zach Parise because the guys they had that were like Zach Parise are now aging out of the NHL. So maybe. I mean, I definitely think he signed somewhere.
So who gets the best, Deej? Let's make these predictions. Who gets the best?
The son of Jean-Paul Parise?
Out of these three entities, who benefits the most by the time it's all in the next, when we look back on this decision in 5 years, maybe even 10, who benefited the most? The Minnesota Wild, Zach Parise, or Ryan Suter?
I think Ryan Suter can pick and choose where he goes and probably walks away from this with at least one more deep playoff run under his belt, if not a cup ring. So I would say that Suter probably benefits. There's no way that the Wild benefit the most from hampering themselves when there already is a dark cloud hanging over the Kaprizov negotiations. This buyout, I don't think, helps them in terms of their ability to pay for one of the best players in the league long term. So it comes down to Parise, who I think, in my opinion, Parise probably with his injury struggles has about 2 years left in the league, where Suter probably has a good 4, which is saying a lot for kind of a hard-nosed defenseman at 36 years old. But he can kind of pick and choose where he wants, take 1-year contracts. And as long as he's not in like a stage of his life where he's looking to like put down roots, maybe he kind of wants to, be what's the word I'm looking for? Like a hired gun for teams where he can pick and choose and throw like a mercenary. Like he can just throw his hat in the ring anytime he thinks a team's about to make a cup run, and he's still good enough that he can very much contribute to a deep playoff run. So I think this is phenomenal for Ryan Suter, who's going to get 2 paychecks.
A lot of pressure on the Minnesota Wild right now to do what they're setting out to do. That's for sure. So, I mean, as if they didn't have an interesting enough offseason to begin with, just got a hell of a lot more interesting here. We'll move on. Our final few talking points here. Pekka Rinne officially retired this morning, I think to the surprise of nobody when it was announced that Nashville was going to be holding a press conference. I mean, I guessed it was going to be another banner raising, but my second guess was Pekka Rinne's retirement at 38 years old. He's going to be 39 this November. Again, no real surprise here when talking about the trajectory of an aging goaltender. And I mean, the only real thing to say here is that he had a fantastic career. Fantastic, you could even say. That I know that pun. I deserve that. The conversation, obviously, when anyone retires is, oh, is he going to be a Hockey Hall of Famer? No, he's not. But that's not to sit here and discredit him, right? He does have the Vezina Trophy. To his credit, he was one of the faces of this Nashville organization post-lockout. And that's the thing. He has been there since the post-lockout year. He made his debut in 05-06. He only played 2 games that year. But, he has been the face of this organization, a steady presence for over a decade at this stage, and was consistently at times in the conversation for one of the best goaltenders in the league. And I mean, you look back to when he won the Vezina Trophy, which was back, if I'm not mistaken, God, when was that actually? Feels like a while ago. Funny thing is, he won it in 17-18. And that season, he had a 927 in 59 games. But he had some pretty damn good seasons. 2010, 2011, he had a 930. The next year, he had a 923. Like, there were some phenomenal seasons for Pekka Rinne, but obviously there was some inconsistency down the stretch. It's incredible that he was the one that was stuck with the Carey Price, or with the Pekka Rinne so hot right now instead of Carey Price, because, I mean, why? I don't understand why he got stuck with the meme label of being inconsistent. Where, guys like him and Bobrovsky, it's, 1 year they're good, the next year they suck, when there are other goalies. And that's right, set the counter to 0 days since I said something about Carey Price not being the best in the world. Bottom line is, phenomenal career. He will have his number retired by the Nashville Predators. And, I mean, I'm sure, I don't know if in that press conference they announced that he would be, moving into a role within the organization, but that also wouldn't surprise me.
I mean, you could probably make a kind of an argument for Steve Sullivan, but I think at this point, Pekka Rinne is probably the greatest player in Nashville Predators history. I
would say so. I mean, had Shea Weber stayed,
yeah,
I think, he would have been there. But, you compare him to, the unfortunate thing is for Preds fans, and I think they know this, when you're talking about your best players in history, like when David Legwand is one of the first options that comes to mind. And I love David Legwand, but, I would have to say it's, talking about the best Preds in history. You're talking about Pekka Rinne, you're talking about Shea Weber, Roman Josi. And then from there, the conversation becomes Philip Forsberg, Mike Fisher, David Legwand, Jason Arnott,
PK Subban that one time,
JP Dumont, Jordan Tutu. So, for my money, Pekka Rinne is probably, the first player you think of when you think of that organization. I mean, Roman Josi still being there is certainly up there as well. But, I mean, for a team that's still so new, I mean, the Preds aren't even 25 years old yet, are they? And
no.
If they are, it's happened recently. I mean, they were established in, what was the official date? 98. So, I mean, not even 25 years old yet as an organization. Pekka Rinne is one of the faces of that franchise. And again, so close to a Stanley Cup as well, not all that long ago. So it's just one of those things where in terms of a talking point, it's like, he just had a really goddamn good career.
That, and I don't know. I guess it's one of those things where it's interesting too. I guess Anders Lindback's your guy, just because in the Yaroslav Askarov saga, there really hasn't been any news. Like, no one's been like, he looks great and he's planning on coming to Nashville soon. And I mean, I guess, no, not Anders Lindback, UC Saros. Sorry, I was waiting. Wrong era.
I was waiting.
UC Saros is definitely your guy. He showed it this year, and I think good on Rinne for passing the torch. And I know I'll miss him. He was the cornerstone of many, many hockey ultimate teams of mine over the years.
Mm-hmm.
You just couldn't play without Rinne. You needed a huge goalie. It's the way the game's coded.
So again, just a fantastic season, fantastic career, set of seasons for Pekka Rinne, which, again, just phenomenal there. Not surprising to hear this retirement. What was surprising, Pierre Maguire has found a new job, Deech.
Why do people keep hiring? Does he interview? He can't interview well. We've seen him do interviews.
He is the new senior vice president of player development for the Ottawa Senators, stating he had turned down a number of NHL management and coaching offers during his time at NBC to honor his commitments. But with the NBC losing rights and his son moving on to college, he took the job with the Sens.
Yeah, I feel like I'm missing something. I mean, for me, when I think of Pierre Maguire, there's always that one iconic moment where he reported on water polo for the 2012 Summer Olympics. That was, the pinnacle of his career when he expanded into water polo. That's a real thing. You should look that up. I don't know. For me, it's confusing, right? Because I think everyone needed just a break from Pierre Maguire, and not enough time had passed for people to kind of develop a nostalgia for his very, very specific interviewing and broadcasting style. And I do think eventually people would have been like, Pierre Maguire was kind of weird. He was great. Let's bring him back as for 1 year. People miss that. And I think maybe it's just a little too soon. Maybe that's how I look at it.
How can I miss you if you won't go away?
Yeah.
So, hey, in terms of his fit as a vice president of player development, I don't know how qualified he is for that particular job. I mean, he's 59. He's going to be 60 in August. He is a two-time Stanley Cup champion, by the way. For those who did not know, he managed to be a part of 2 cup teams with Pittsburgh. But he hasn't held a staff job since he was the head coach of a team that I wish still existed back in 96-97 in the ECHL, known as the Baton Rouge Kingfish. That was the last time that he had a job. That team, by the way, icing the likes of future NHL greats such as Shane Knighty and nobody else from the looks of it. They did have a guy named Billy J. Johnson, though. I mean, he has scouting experience. He has a little bit of head coaching experience with the Hartford Whalers.
He was their head coach of the Whalers at one point. He was also their assistant GM. And then there was the Oilers debacle where he was scouting players for the Oilers while working for the Whalers, which is what got him fired. So I guess there is a history of player development knowledge. Criminally so.
It's just a weird situation. Aside from that as well, the Pekka Rinne, the Pierre Maguire stuff, only 2 other talking points, quick ones here too. The Blues are apparently in on Gabriel Landeskog with free agency 2 weeks away. I don't blame them, but the word was from Lou Korak. I'm not sure about that, but he said, I'm told the Blues will apply a full pitch effort, and the feeling is he'd be a great fit as left wing line mates with pal Ryan O'Reilly and David Perron. I agree. That would be phenomenal for the Blues. You move on from Tarasenko, get whatever return there. You bring in Landeskog. That wouldn't be that bad. But, God, imagine Colorado without Landeskog was the only thought I had.
Yeah, that would be very unfortunate for Colorado. I think he's kind of the glue that keeps everything together there.
Captain of the team?
Yeah. Youngest captain in NHL history at one point until he was stripped of that honor by young upstart sellsword Connor McDavid.
And the last talking point here as well just had to do with the update on penalties in the league. Pierre LeBrun mentioned one takeaway from today's GM meetings. According to some who were on the call, big discussion and general agreement by the group on wanting to more clearly define the standard for cross-checking. The discussion next goes to the NHL/NHLPA competition committee. So, Deej, maybe, just maybe, we are on the verge of not seeing players, paralyzed by getting repeatedly cross-checked in the lower back for 82 games a season.
Yeah, one can only hope. For me, so when I read this, I was like, this is a good thing. And then it settled for 15 minutes. I was like, wait, just cross-checking? That's the only one we're going to look at? I was like, I guess, you're going to eat an elephant one bite at a time or whatever, but you do you, NHL.
Oh, God. So, hey, A solid show in the books, technical issues aside. Again, some talking points. It's funny because Deej, you head into a show like this, and I had this thought with like YouTube videos for the longest time, where people are like, "Hey, you got to talk about Pecorine?" And I'm like, "Sure," for 2 minutes. Like I like Pecorine a lot, but it's like, well, what more can you say than like, "Hey, good dude, great career. We'll see what's next." Like, there's not that intense. Like, there's more of a debate to whether or not Andrei Vasilevsky's a Hockey Hall of Famer right now than there is with, Pecorine being a Hall of Famer. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I just think, and that's the thing too, is like we had to have a discussion about why Andrei Vasilevsky's a Hall of Famer, and I think that says enough about why it's going to be extremely difficult for Pecorine to get there.
In terms of that debate, the cups do matter. And you know what else matters, Deej?
Well, what matters is maybe we should do a live stream on Twitch, not of the draft, not of free agency, not of the expansion draft, but of the hit 1994 Super Nintendo video game Home Improvement Power Tool Pursuit.
Oh, you mean the Genesis game where you take Tim the Toolman Taylor and fight dinosaurs with a screwdriver?
Or a blowtorch, or a saw that hurls energy waves. There's also Mummies. Mummies, actually, I don't know if you know this, but Mummies, they hate Home Improvement because their tombs are supposed to be sealed and stay dusty. Like, you can't renovate the tombs, and that's why Mummies hate Home Improvement. I'm sorry. Listen, it makes sense. But if you don't hate Home Improvement, you should improve your own home, your area, your landscaping, your manscaping. Use code Tougie. 20% off at manscaped.com. Manscaped, our gracious sponsors. They're keeping this show on the air, indirectly keeping you informed about Stephen Tobolowsky's unaired job and acting roles. Manscaped, home of the Weed Whacker, the Lawnmower 4.0, the Ultra Smooth Package, refined, the scent of the gods, a nose ambrosia, if you will, an amnosia. Not to be confused with amnesia. It is a phenomenal smell. Use code Tougie, Tougie, for 20% off at manscaped.com. Manscaped, your balls will thank you, and so will we. Tougie, do you have any final thoughts?
Do you want to have a almost Hall of Fame career like a 258th overall pick like Pecorine was? Use code Tougie. And if you want to listen to more of our incredible summer ranting and rambling, make sure you're following the podcast. Make sure you're subbed on YouTube.
Yeah.
It's going to be a long summer.
The dinosaurs make sense too, right? Because like they see Home Improvement. They like dinosaurs in the history of dinosaur movies. They don't eat through rubes. So they're just like, guess those people are off the menu. I don't know. Let's find the people who developed this game. They're all in jail for drugs. Oh, that makes sense. Okay. See y'all later this week.
Bye, everybody.